Hello everyone, my name is Steven and welcome to Storytime. Today we're going to be reading some malicious compliance stories. Tales where following the rules can lead to some just desserts. And let me just say, if you're not already subscribed to Storytime, please consider doing so. But with that being said, let's sit back, relax, and listen to some captivating Reddit stories. Shame me with lunch detention? Joke's on you. I will sit here forever. It was the late 90s, I was still wearing too much flannel and continuing my historical trend of keeping books from the library much too long. I had a paper due for my sophomore global studies class, so I naturally took out more books than I could read, wrote the essay, and completely forgot about the books piled in the corner of my bedroom. After a series of overdue slips sent to my homeroom, I eventually did return the 4 or 5 books one sunny afternoon in the anonymous drop book during a study period. Promptly moved on to bigger and better things. About 2 weeks later, I was called down to the assistant principal's office in that space of time before classes officially started that was reserved for one thing and one thing only. The reprobates and delinquents were in trouble. I walked the halls thinking that surely this was just a timing mishap and I was being summoned to receive congratulations for some kind of award I didn't know I had entered into competition for. Yep, he just wants to prepare me for the surprise ticker tape parade. I was wholly unprepared to hear that I was receiving lunch detention to start immediately because I had not returned a single book that I still remember was slim and had a white and red cover from my global studies paper research. I tried to argue that there was a mistake since I was sure, like I am sure I have fingertips, that I had returned it. But he could not be moved, and I was sentenced to indefinite lunch detention until I either returned the book or paid the $16 to replace it. I left the office, late for first period, defeated, but kept my head held high at lunch later that day as I walked past the entirety of cafeteria, which held a couple hundred of my peers. Plastic food tray in hand, I went down the hall to the old shop classroom that had since been moved and the awaiting detention. I checked in with Mrs. Brown at her desk in front and took an inconspicuous seat in the back. Staring down at my canned peach slices, I braced for the worst. A murderous ruckus were going to break out any minute, I could tell. But once my ears stopped ringing, I discovered that it was really a calm escape from the crowded and rowdy lunchroom. I ate slowly that day, enjoyed my young thoughts in blissful quiet, and wondered what kind of heaven was this. To be fair, I did search far and wide for that book that first day. Attempts to find it in my locker, bedroom, and backpack were fruitless, and the general consensus in my home was that the school was being ridiculous. I certainly wasn't going to pay for something I didn't lose. So the next day, considering my brief brush with the law and the invisible stain already attached to my reputation, I went armed with a book in my lunch past the maddening crowds to the detention room. I sat there, day after day, for nearly 2 months of lunches. In retrospect, to this day, those remain some of the most relaxing lunch breaks of my life. I had around 40 solid minutes to recharge in, mostly, complete silence with my reasonably priced lunch and whatever book I was currently reading. I had to recount my origin story a few times since no one could figure out how the quiet bookworm of a girl who had never been in trouble before had landed in the wilds of detention. But I was mostly left to my own devices in this newly found peaceful retreat. I was friendly with Mrs. Brown, who had worked for the district of my small town since I was in elementary school, and even hooked her up with a sweet horse whisper poster that she loved from my family's mom and pop video store. She must have felt bad for me, because somewhere around the 1-month mark, she started up a collection to cover the cost of the book. She added the initial donation, but teachers who would stop by to chit-chat would add loose change to it, and the race to buy my freedom was on. After a few weeks, she handed me just under $7. My love of solitude was no match for the guilt of carrying around that money or my mom, who had just started a new job in the school district, so with a heavy heart I paid in full for the missing book and went back to my old lunch table in the thick of the action. Months later, during the last week of school, I was called down to the library at my convenience and with sweaty palms forced myself to face the music over what was inevitably going to be yet another overdue book at the end of the day. Well, lo and behold, the end of the year inventory check had located the book as waylaid in the wrong section of the library. I received a few sheepish looks from the librarians as they refunded the money and apologized in a backward way that still made me the bad guy, as overdue books are the real blemish on one's character, so how were they to assume that I didn't lose the book? Remember my mom's new job in the school? Well, she just happened to be walking by the library just as I was finishing up, and to say that she laid into them is far too extreme sounding. But she did scold some stern-faced librarians into giving me a proper apology. She also demanded that they look into reforming their system and, my favorite part, take the proper measures to expunge my record. She was very concerned about me carrying around the albatross of false accusation, apparently. And just like that, my life of crime was over. First off, let me say OP wrote this story beautifully and I enjoyed reading it very much. It's kind of a sad ending in a way because OP enjoyed Detention so much. All throughout this, I was getting flashbacks of my high school era. Back in middle school, I rented out a CD for some science class, and then I never returned it, and I lost it. And then I graduated to high school and cleaned out my garage, and I actually found the CD, and I took it to the high school library, and they managed to figure that all out for me, thankfully without any headache on my part. But I did have a slip saying this thing was overdue for a long time. What? I can't wear a belt if I wanted to. This actually happened in 2006 in my sophomore year of high school. We had just gotten a new principal that year and he decided to completely change the dress code. One of the new rules was that any male who wore pants with belt loops absolutely had to be wearing a belt. It was nearing the end of the year and him and I already had a few run-ins which turned into him looking for any reason to write me up. I'm not saying that I was an angel or anything, but most of it came from me not being intimidated by him and standing up for myself when I honestly hadn't done anything wrong. I overslept one morning and was in a rush and when I got to school, I realized that the shorts I was wearing had belt loops and I'd forgotten to wear a belt. I didn't really care as the punishment for dress code violations was always a warning unless it was recurring, and I had never done this before. When we were changing classes, I passed by the principal in the hallway and noticed him looking at my beltless pants. I really didn't feel like dealing with him at the moment, so I slipped around the corner and into the swarm of other students before he could call me out. When I got to my next class, immediately the intercom came on. It was the principal making an announcement telling all teachers to check all boys' pants and send any boys breaking dress code to detention for the rest of the day. This really ticked me off because I had never broken dress code before, my pants were not sagging, and most importantly, I wouldn't be eligible to play in our tennis match after school if I got detention. Luckily, my teacher wasn't in the classroom yet, but I knew that I wasn't getting out of it that easily. In a hasty decision, I ran to the teacher's desk, took her pair of scissors, and cut every belt loop of my pants, much to the amusement of my classmates. The teacher came in a minute later, completely missing the announcement. But sure enough, the principal sticks his head in the door about 10 minutes later, after obviously noticing my absence in detention. He tried to play it off like he came to talk to the teacher about something and just so happened at that moment to notice my pants. With the smuggest look on his face, he said, "OP, did you wear a belt today?" "No, sir." "Well, why aren't you in detention?" I stood up and revealed my newly tailored pants and said, "Because I don't have belt loops, sir." Most of the class is losing it at this point, and if looks could kill, I would be dead. There was nothing he could do though because no one would admit that I had just cut them and the rules clearly stated that it was only against dress code if your pants had loops. This was not the end of our run-ins, but I at least won that round. Drastic times calls for drastic measures. OP had a situation he needed to get himself out of, and very quickly got himself right out of that situation. That was quick and smart thinking by OP. The only downside is you had to actually cut the belt loops off the shorts, so I don't know if you ever had, planned on wearing a belt with it, but you could never do that again. But that's probably nothing compared to the sweet, sweet feeling of revenge that OP got on the principal. Accidentally, on purpose, started a howl at work. I work at a doggy daycare with a no noise rule. No barking, no whimpering, no howling, no growling. We don't freak out if a dog does it, but we tell them no and make them sit down. This is very successful and we largely have a relatively quiet workplace. The reason we do this is to prevent fights. A coworker recently got a puppy who is around 4 months old. He is going through the barking at random things phase. Same rules apply. He sternly tells him no and gets him to sit down. The other day, this puppy was playing aggressively, albeit quietly, with a few other dogs. The puppy starts doing some rapid barking when the dog he was playing with gets bored and walks away. I get up to go and correct him, just doing my job, you know? His owner gets upset with me and tells me that they're just playing and to leave him alone. Annoyed, I walk away. Double standard city. My dog always gets grief from other coworkers, including this one when he barks. About 45 minutes go by and I'm about to finish my shift. I let my dogs out to go potty, standing by the open door so I can watch the dogs still inside, and there is a coon dog outside on the opposite side of the play area I let my dogs into. She begins chasing my dogs up and down the fence line. My dog, a husky, is absolutely vibing with this. He loves to play chase. The coon dog starts barking and I think, in my head, to tell her off. Cue malicious compliance. I let it go. They're outside, right? And come on, they're just playing. My dog barks back. The coon dog starts to howl. My dog, again a husky, in response howls back. This goes on for about 30 seconds, them howling at each other. Now remember how I said I was standing by an open door? I hear it start. A husky from inside, older and kind of a do no harm but take no grief kind of dog gets a burr in her butt and starts to howl in response. The dominoes begin to fall. One after another, dogs are howling in response to each other. I know this isn't going to cause any issues, so I just watch the chaos ensue. My coworkers are all rushing to get the dogs to stop howling, but there are too many. I can see the clock up on the wall and it says 3:03. I'm not on the clock, not my clowns, not my circus. My dogs finish their business and I leash them up and start walking them out to my car. As I get in my car and drive away, I hear the howls continue. Some say they're still howling to this day. Update, currently at work 3 days later. All's quiet on the Western Front, unfortunately. Although manager did pull me aside and ask if I was doing alright. Told him I was starting to get annoyed with double standards. He said he'd look into it. Hopeful, but not expecting much. Good on OP for letting the dogs enjoy themselves and getting a little bit of revenge on some double standard having coworkers. Primary school malicious compliance. When I was a kid, we had a primary school teacher who had her favorites. All girls and disliked nearly all the boys. The girls could get away with anything, but boys were ruled with iron discipline. One day, the teacher caught me chatting with the girl next to me. I think we were 6 years old. And I was told to go and stand in and face the corner, but the girl was barely told off. After what seemed like hours, I realized the teacher had forgotten and it was going home time. Even at the age of 6, I understood the concept of malicious compliance, so I continued to stand in the corner silently while all the other kids left, caught the bus, and went home. Finally, the teacher realized I was still there and asked why hadn't I left. I told her she hadn't said I could leave the corner. She then had to ring my parents and explain, and my mother had to come all the way to school and collect me, and was not best pleased with the teacher. I was all innocently wounded, but inside I had tasted the true flavor of subversiveness, which I still regularly enjoy to this day. Honestly, I'm kinda surprised that OP had that much patience when they're 6 years old. I might have been smart enough at that point to try and do something similar, but at some point, I probably would have given up because I don't have the patience of that long. I of course would have just preferred to just go home and give up. But kudos to OP for sticking it out and getting their parents in on the case and not being too happy about it. Hopefully maybe it turned the wheels a little bit for the teacher, at least a little bit. From the teacher. As a teacher, I have a soft spot for the malicious compliance of my students. One of my favorites? I was giving my kids the standard lecture on listening and not interrupting, no doubt sounding like Charlie Brown's teacher. A few days later, I couldn't find my new stapler anywhere. I looked all day. Finally, one straight-faced third grader walked up to me. "You knocked your stapler in the trash the other day. Why didn't you tell me?" "It was when you were telling us not to interrupt when you were talking and I didn't want to interrupt you." Well played, my friend. Well played. To be fair, as a student that wasn't the most extroverted and wasn't always one that would speak up, I probably wouldn't have said anything either concerning the circumstances and everything about not interrupting. And also, I really like the reference to Charlie Brown's teacher, because that's not something I think about too much, and it was kind of a little bit of a throwback. Thinking about that womp 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 kind of speech. Sick compliance. The coronavirus is spreading and the province I live in is on lockdown. The advice from the government is to work from home and stay at home with even the smallest symptoms, like a cough or a sneeze. Yesterday at work, we got an email telling us that our company will not be letting us work from home. So I maliciously complied and called in sick today. I have a very little cough and sometimes a sneeze. Not something I would call in sick for ever. You're up here. When workers call in sick, the employer bears the cost. We don't have the concept of sick days here. You still get your wage when you're sick up to 2 years. First off, as an American, you already see how much Europe is better with the sick days thing. But secondly, yeah, good on OP. If your work is gonna be risky, you go ahead, take that time off, and make sure that you and your family are all good. Cause with the coronavirus going around, this is not the time to play around with that kind of stuff. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for listening to and watching the Storytime channel. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing and let us know what you thought about these stories in the comments below. Thank you all again for watching and listening to the Storytime channel.